What time is it? It's dawn. Who's coming? He who comes with the dawn. That's right, the Karn is here, and Rand couldn't be happier to step into the role. This season, they really are pulling out all the stops, but this episode is probably the one that I have been most looking forward to out of all of the things in the entire Wheel of Time series. This is probably top 10 moments for me. I might do a whole video of like my top 10 favorite moments in the Wheel of Time, but this one is right up there at the top for sure. Because if there is one thing that I love about fantasy, it's when authors take the time to do the world building, and boy did Robert Jordan put in the work with this one. As we see in this episode, we've seen a lot of brief allusions to the Age of Legends and the breaking of the world, but here is where we actually get to see it all play out. And they gave us some things and some scenes on screen that we did not get to see in the show, which I'm actually really stoked about. But to begin at the beginning, we open this episode with something that I've really been aching for them to give to us in the show, and that is talking about the flame and the void. Because if there is one, and I mean only one, technique that Rand has at his advantage and in his toolkit from the beginning, even as a wetlander, sheep herder, backwater two rivers boy, it is what his father taught him in archery, which is the flame and the void, where you're able to just really focus and hone in on the present moment, block everything out, and any outside distraction or emotion you feed into the flame until there's nothing left but the flame and the void. And we'll see Rand start to maybe lean a little bit too heavily into the void aspect of things as he develops and has to assume all of these mantles of responsibility as the dragon. But for now, it is an advantage to be able to slip into this very focused and not distracted mentality whenever you need to. So as something that's been present and that he thinks about from the very beginning, and since like Eye of the World, I'm really glad that he finally took a moment to mention it here, just like with the last episode when he finally took a moment to address out loud with Moraine a little bit of what it feels like to have to wield Saidin that I've been talking about this whole time, and like the stark contrast between how it feels outside of just the Dark One corrupting it to how it feels to wield and control Saidar. So outside of that, I just like that we got to open with a little bit more of Rand and Lan bonding, because they do form a little bit of mentor-mentee relationship. And then we also finally take a little brief moment to address some more concepts of Aiel culture, such as G-Ato extending to Gaishane, or servants, or people who take like a year and a day, something like that. Within Aiel clans, you have to adopt a servitory role. If you're able to approach an enemy in battle and get close enough to them to touch them and basically say, tag, you're it, without actually killing them, it's kind of a mark of honor and prowess amongst this elite warrior culture. And it also just kind of makes practical sense as a system in place to prevent this very isolated and small culture from infighting to the extent that they wipe each other out. Good system to have to prevent everyone from killing everyone over just blood feuds and cattle reigns and things like that. And then we also see an interesting new scene that was added where Lan and Avienda go one-on-one, spear versus sword, to see which is the better weapon and who's the better warrior. But we also see that it's just them having a good time and getting to really go all out and finally have an opponent with which they can put all of their skills to the test, which is fun to see, and everyone's having a good time watching the contest. I like that even she and other Aiel call him Analain Interestingly enough, I was going back and rereading a summary of The Dragon Reborn, the Aiel. I think that's actually where Nynaeve and the girls are the ones that meet Aviendha for the first time, because she asks them to come heal her friend who was injured. Not to go off on an entire tangent, but I'm about to go off on an entire tangent, so skip it if you don't want to listen to plots from The Dragon Reborn. Aviendha actually approaches the girls because she thinks or mistakes them for full Aes Sedai and asks them to come help her injured comrade or fellow maiden of the spear. But all of that to say that they talk about Lan in that meeting and mention how the Malkieri themselves kind of had some notoriety amongst the Aiel because they teamed up with the Shienarans to kind of fight against the Aiel in the past. And so that's kind of how they gained acclaim very early on amongst the Aiel as capable warriors, and then once we had the fall of Malkier, Lan gained even more notoriety amongst them. But then we see Aviendha finally drafted to become a Wise One apprentice, but she's really reluctant to give up her identity as a Maiden of the Spear, which is definitely on point for her journey and her character arc in books. Here we literally see her being stripped of that identity in front of everyone, including Rand, which I'm sure is very embarrassing and humiliating for her, but we see her have to show a lot of humility here. We see like Rand, I think they made a point of in the shot having him standing right behind her as all this is happening, watching her have to face and accept her new role within Aiel society, and she just immediately does. We see her kind of hesitate a little bit and maybe a little bit of a sniffle and holding back tears, but other than that, there is no protest and no complaint on her part. She accepts her new role. I mean, internally she still struggles with it as the novels go on, but here in front of everyone she doesn't dishonor herself. She saves face and just accepts it. So I think that's also going to have a big impact on Rand struggling to accept all of these roles, especially amongst Aiel society, with having to be the Karakarn but be an outsider. But then in the next scene as we see, still butting heads big time with Moiraine and refusing to confide in her or get counsel from her in any way. He instead wants her word that she won't try to hinder or control him, which she can't give. And I think her whole lesson or takeaway from this episode is going to be the possible effects and consequences of that mentality if she carries it forward with trying to control Rand and steer him where she thinks he needs to go. Being willing to go so far as to team up with Lanfear to achieve those ends. I liked that in the next scene we take a little bit of a moment to have Rand confer and talk one-on-one with Rhuarc, because they have another really strong like mentor-mentee relationship, and Rhuarc, unlike Moiraine, is someone that Rand is willing to listen to and get counsel from, especially to navigate his way amongst the other Aiel. Because Rhuarc, he's kind of the Stilgar of the Aiel. He's the Stilgar to Rand's Muad'Dib, and the one who's like the most on board amongst the Aiel and as head of the Tardad clan to just back Rand as the Karakarn and support him, even against other Aiel clans, as we'll see in this episode. But he makes a point to tell Rand that they will know the Karakarn because twice and twice shall he be marked by the dragon tattoos. And I liked that here they're not just tattoos, but they also seem more like scarification, where they're like engraved deep into the skin. Speaking of other Aiel and Rhuidean, just chef's kiss to how they portrayed Rhuidean here as the city steeped in this eternal fog, but still very reminiscent of construction from the Age of Legends. Another chef's kiss for the way they introduce rival clans amongst the Aiel, most notably the Shido, and not only Couladin, who I've been waiting for, but we're getting Savannah, which I did not know if we were going to get. I don't know if she's going to have as big of a role or as long of a story as they end up doing it in the books. I got kind of sick of her by the end, as I'm sure a lot of people, including the other Shido and the Shido Wise Ones, were, because she's definitely very much too big for her britches, strolling in on her high horse, pun intended, since the Aiel don't ride horses. We see that she thinks very highly of herself. I love the headdress that they gave her, and the amount of jewelry that she wears is seen as very gaudy amongst the other Aiel, so that's very accurate and on point. And not only that, we see Bear hint that Rand's mom was possibly not Aiel, even though we saw her fighting with the Aiel as a Maiden of the Spear. What's up with that? Some cool foreshadowing there to file away for later, along with the Tigraine name drop that we got in the last episodes. But we also see here the reveal that Bear can channel, so I like that we saw the look exchanged between Moraine and Egwene. Like, did you just see that? The Aiel are notably absent amongst all of the women at the White Tower, so they kind of just assumed that maybe the Aiel just weren't strong in the one power and didn't have channelers, because surely anyone who's anyone and everyone who can channel would want to go to the White Tower because it's just the greatest institution on the earth. But we will see that that is very much not the case. Not all wise ones can channel. You don't have to be a channel to be a wise one, but if you, like Avienda, are a female channeler, then you do have to receive wise one training to learn to control it. But that, yeah, they don't necessarily hold the viewpoint that Moraine and even maybe Egwene will have, that the White Tower is the best place to be trained. Bear also, very notably, will not let Egwene go with Rand to Rhuidean and says that their paths do not align. And I think we will see, like, even as soon as the end of this episode, their paths beginning to diverge. As they walk to the city, she says they will see some things that must be for you and some things that must not. I really loved seeing Rand and Moraine enter the city and the big statues in front. Again, just really going all out and pulling out all the stops to give us this scope and scale of the epic time periods of Randland and the passing of time and how much has been lost since the time of the Age of Legends. It definitely was serving me never-ending story energy. And we see the giant Avendasora tree called the Tree of Life, and Moraine takes a moment here to give us some background on the origins of the Aiel War that I talked a little bit about in my last review and breakdown, and really emphasizing and driving home here that her and Rand's destinies are intertwined and maybe have been this entire time, not just by her own choices that she's made since learning about him and trying to find him and help him, but even before she went to the tower. Yeah, as we find out, Rand's real dad killed her uncle. If her uncle hadn't chosen to cut down that tree, the Aiel War never would have started, and Rand's parents would have had no reason to even be on the slopes of Dragon Mount. Then I don't even know how to sum up everything that we see when Rand walks through the glass columns. I really love the way they depicted the glass columns. They were even more epic than I had ever pictured in my mind, where I just kind of, for some reason, pictured it as like you could see the tops of the glass columns while you walked through them, but here it's just more like a forest, and I like that you hear this like eerie groaning and creaking from them, almost like trees. I mean, first off, yeah, we start with Rand seeing through the eyes of his Aiel father, which we did not get in the novels, so I liked that he really gets to see a glimpse of where he really comes from, and sadly have to see that moment, and it's really devastating. Latra possède d'écume from the flashback of season 1, and here she is ancient, beyond ancient. Aes Sedai in Age of Legends could live even longer than they can in the current age. So she literally, as we will see, is thousands of years old when we see her in this first flashback creating the glass columns. I love the precision of the weaves that she uses to show how precise and honed their techniques and like how advanced their channeling techniques were back then. Rand with his two buddies, just with that vigor and innocence of youth. It's very like him, Matt, and Perrin coded, and also very like Merry and Pippin coded, where they're just these rambunctious rapscallions, very innocent. The Aiel at this point in time are trying to raise their children to be sheltered and to follow the pacifist way of the leaf. The world has broken and everyone's fallen on hard times. Nothing and nowhere is safe anymore. Try as they might, other people in society are turning to violence and banditry and just every man for themselves. I like that out of all of the scenes and the flashbacks that they did make a point of giving us this one, because it really shows when they made the choice to break away and how that happened, that it wasn't really a willing choice. It was kind of forced upon them, both by having to choose to finally make a stand and stand up for themselves and defend themselves and choose to pick up a weapon, but being shunned from other Aiel pacifist society as a result, being forced to break off and become a whole separate society that chooses to wield weapons and to defend themselves. That really was not their choice. So that just really broke my heart in that moment. The shunning happening and poor Lewin and his friend being outcast from society, even though they did it to protect their family, and the girls are brought back in and accepted. But yeah, once they chose to pick up those weapons, we see no mercy is shown to them, even by their own parents. You know, his own mother rejects him for the choice that he made, and it was really heartbreaking to see in that scene. Like I've said, we see the Irish accents carrying through even more strongly, to where Rand is even pulling off somewhat of an Irish accent in that scene. And man, just him calling for his mom, that broke me. That almost made me cry. And then I like that they did keep the book accuracy of Rand catching up to Rhuidean in the towers, and not only that, but seeing the repercussions of Aiel who are not able to cope with the reality that's being laid on them, and that Rhuidean is clawing out his own eyes as a result because he really does not want to see what he is seeing. He cannot come to terms with the Aiel's true origins. And I loved the little moment that they took to give us the expression on Rand's face when he sees that of, oh my god, barbecue, what the fuck? We cut to Moraine, and I'm just gonna list off very quickly what she sees. Very discombobulating, stomach churning between the camera work that they did, and the music was very just, yeah, like her being incepted. But we see her getting that dream life of getting to live in the hut in Tears, a fishwife with Swan, herself as Amerlin instead of Swan, with Egwene of all people as her keeper, and them killing Rand mercilessly in the hall of the tower. We see her unbonding Lan and bonding Rand, which for some reason, just even though that seemed like probably one of the most innocent of all of the things, the wrongness of that really hit me, and I was just like, no, do not do that. I don't know, it just struck me as very wrong, a very wrong decision of her to do, but not the wrongest. We see a lot of variations of her either trying to help Rand or kill Rand, her fighting Lanfear, her swearing herself to Rand in what I thought was just some village, but it does look like it is Emond's Field. we see Moiraine getting it on with Rand. And that was like the most wrong. We see a brief timeline where everyone's evil, and we'll come back to that at the end. We see Rand and Lanfear in the White Tower killing her, and then a lot of just her getting ganked by Lanfear in different ways. My takeaway from this was she sees 1,000 turns of the wheel, and in all of them, she fails Rand in some way. All of this happens off screen in the novel, so I'm glad that they did give us Moraine's passage through the ter'angreal in Rhuidean and some of what she sees, because we don't get any of that. But in the Fires of Heaven, we do get a very rare Moiraine POV where she is reflecting back on some of what she saw in the rings, and definitely emphasizing the some things that must not happen under any circumstances, because in that POV she does mention that one of the things the rings showed her was her trying to control Rand through sex, and that is the one thing that would, more than anything else, end in disaster. So that was her main takeaway, was whatever you do, do not fuck Rand. Because especially as we saw after that point was when we really saw Lanfear coming for her. As much as Lanfear already has it out for Moiraine for being too close to Rand, that would definitely drive her off the deep end. But some of the other things that we see in Rand's visions, I like that they showed us the passage of time through Avendasora, where when Moiraine and Rand see it as this huge 3,000-year-old tree, and then as we go further and further back in time, the tree is getting younger and younger and smaller to show us how far back we're going and show that long epic passage of time. And not only that, but how these trees that give off this peaceful aura, and now in the Third Age there's only one left in the whole world, but in the Age of Legends it was commonplace. They lined every single street in every city in the Age of Legends, which is probably what contributed to it being this peaceful utopia. Everyone was just literally breathing in like Prozac air from these trees. But I love that we do take a point of seeing what we didn't get to see in the novels, which was Mierin Sedai drilling the boar into the Dark One's prison, because that was another image that just really stuck in my mind when I first read it on the page, was seeing the Sharome, or this floating sphere, which is just this like epic mental image of high fantasy and just how much of a magic driven utopia this was, where you could do amazing gravity defying things like that with the one power, floating an entire spherical research center in the air. Boar being drilled into the Dark One's prison, shattering that sphere, and just the image of it breaking like an egg being that stark mental image to really drive it home that the world is broken now as of this moment. And not only that, but they took it so far as to show us that it was not just a boar being drilled through that building, but it was a rip in the fabric of reality itself. And it was definitely giving me Eye of Sauron, but make it dark, make it the shadow. But I love that we got to see that emphasized. And not only that, but I was really happy that the further back we got in the flashbacks, they started to give us the book accurate Aiel hairstyle that they all had, because I was really wondering if they were gonna do that and like lean in hard enough to make even present day Aiel wear the short cropped hair with the little braided rat tail in the back. So I'm kind of glad they didn't, because it looks a little bit lame, and I think it just would have been boring and difficult to pull off putting all of those actors in that haircut. And not everyone's gonna pull that off, but I do like that they did at least make a point of giving that to us in the flashbacks and amongst like the true Aiel. And in my random video that I did where I was analyzing the trailer with Rand and his End of the Island look and was he looking at Mierin Sedai, I wasn't 100% accurate, because as we saw, the ancestor in that outfit was talking with Latra when she sent the Aiel forth into the world to kind of try to protect them and keep these Aes Sedai artifacts, including the Karnan, safe. But we do see in the next flashback, Rand's ancestors worked directly under / for Mieran Sedai. And that's why calling the modern day Aiel the people of the dragon specifically is a little bit of a misnomer, and they don't like it. As we see here, the Aiel just served the Aes Sedai in general, and certain Aiel families would serve specific Aes Sedai. They didn't all serve just Luz Theron Telamon. That just kind of became a mixed up later on down the line, thinking that all Aiel serve the dragon, and they kind of don't like being associated with the dragon because he's attributed with, breaking the world. But as we see here, it was actually Mieran Sedai / Lanfear that drilled the boar into the Dark One's prison because she was searching for the true power, a source of power outside of the one power where men and women and channelers and non-channelers could utilize it equally. Come to find out, the thinness of the pattern was actually a thinness over the seal on the Dark One's prison. So that's what she was drilling into. And the true power she was sensing was actually just the Dark One's power. And we note here that she's not just talking about wanting to have this power that can supposedly better society, but also mentions the importance of holding on to the people you love the most, because that's also kind of her secret underlying motivation for wanting this power source, is so she can hold on to her status and hopefully thereby also hold on to Luz Theron Telamon, her one true love. So yeah, I love that we got to see her actually at work in her research institute, and that it's said that there was another researcher, Aes Sedai researcher, who was leading the team, but we don't really hear about him much before, during, or after the drilling of the boar. And really, I think Lanfear / Mieran was the driving force behind the project and wanting to do it. I like that we saw a little glimpse of what I'm calling her one power Large Hadron Collider. Sadly, you see the after effects of that with the collapse of the Sharome and the fucking hole being ripped into reality. Rand emerges. We see him collapse finally, luckily, on the other side of the pillars. Poor Muradin, alas, we hardly knew ye. He did not make it, but I like that they made a point of showing us the dragon tattoos being engraved into his skin, and just the look on Rand's face when he sees it happen, shit. As they sink in, the reality sinks in that, fuck, I really am gonna have to be the Carkarn now and have to do this on top of being Dragon Reborn. But despite all of that, despite coming through the ordeal and being the Carkarn and having the marks to prove it, Aviendha still calls him a wetlander, and so I think that's why he was smirking while she walked away. It was just the comfort of kind of knowing that despite everything that's happening, some things are never gonna change, and she's still just gonna be a wetlander in his eyes. But that's kind of comforting in a way. He's, Carkarn now, but she still sees him as Rand al'Thor, scruffy nerf herder from the Two Rivers. Cut to a little brief scene between Land and Egwene, of all people, who I think don't get a lot of time interacting together on screen or on page, but they make a note that they have been in Rhuidean for 7 days at this point, so I'm just like, how long did it take you to go through those pillars? Because Aviendha, they say, came back on the 5th day, so they've been in there 2 whole days now on their own, and 7 days in total, which is crazy. And just makes me wonder, how long was Moraine being flipped around, turned around, inside out and upside down, and spun right around in that ter'angreal? Because by the end, and the screams and the look on her face was just like, let me out of this thing. I don't want to see anymore. I'm done. I'm good. I don't want to.
I don't wanna.
And I wish maybe that they chatted a little bit more outside of giving us some exposition, just because we get so little like Lan Egwene interaction. Did make a note that she had thankfully lost the little leash and collar accessory that she was wearing, and I wonder if after this it's kind of symbolic of her not only stepping away from that like Damani trauma, but also untethering herself from Rand as well, since they made a point, or Bader made a point of telling her that their paths do not align. It was very impactful that despite not trusting Moraine, not really wanting to work with her or align himself with her goals, and not wanting to confide in her, Rand still won't leave Rhuidean without her. And not only that, carries her physically out of Rhuidean and back to Lan. So I think after that, and after seeing what she has seen in particular, Moraine knows that their destinies are even more intertwined, even more strongly intertwined. That's why she kind of has the look that she does when she's being handed off to Lan, of just, my poor baby, my poor little Rand, look how I failed you. And doesn't want to be separated from him. I like that upon like second, third rewatch, if you really look at Rand / Yosha's face right there at the end, the single tear fall down his face, so he also has been really impacted by what he's seen. 10 out of 10 to Yosha's acting and just really carrying this episode on his back and carrying the, I don't know, like the momentousness of this moment in the story as such a big, impactful moment of the Wheel of Time novels as a whole, and carrying that in this episode, because it's really bittersweet that Latra calls the Aiel these oath breakers and says that they're all oath breakers, but really it's just because after thousands, like literally thousands of years spent wandering the desert and wandering this broken wasteland, and after literal generations, some of them did forget their oaths to serve the Aes Sedai and look after their stuff and to like keep to the way of the leaf. But after that long of a passage of time, and then humans with average lifespans not having that scope of memory that an Aes Sedai would have living for thousands of years, it's like, can you really blame them for not being able to keep it up for thousands of years? And not once, not never, until Rhuidean was finished, did any Aes Sedai show up to collect their belongings? Sadly, by the time this place of safety that she sent them out in search for commanded them to keep moving, don't stop until you find safe refuge. But by the time that happened, it had been so long that all of the true Aiel, or the Gen Aiel, who kept to all of those oaths, had all gone extinct. So it is a little bit ironic that modern day Aiel call the Tuatha or the Tinkers the lost ones, when one could argue that they are the lost ones because they abandoned the way of the leaf. The Tinkers abandoned their charge to stay with those wagons and look after Avendasora and the other Terangrial, which had been put into their charge, but they at least kept to the way of the leaf and the keep it moving part of the deal. Now we know the true origins of the Aiel. One thing that I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get to see in the flashbacks, I mean, I get why we cut it out because it wasn't really integral to Rand's ancestral storyline or the Aiel ancestral history as a whole, but we did get a flashback in the novels that revealed the origin of the Maidens of the Spear in particular. Somewhere along the line, not only did people like Lewin decide that, what, I've had enough of this pacifism thing and not being able to defend myself. Eventually, women as well were tired of their loved ones and their daughters and their sisters being kidnapped and carried off by bandits. So they also decide to pick up a spear and defend themselves. And that is also why the Aiel carry short spears, because we see one of the men like take a spear spear and break it and hand it to her so that she isn't like tripping over it and getting it caught in her skirts. And that's also why the Maidens of the Spear choose to dress like they do and wear pants, because it's easier to fight in. I'm hoping we'll still take the time to at least go back and touch on what we have in the show so far, with Rand not only being born of a Maiden of the Spear, but that being a big deal because since maidens are a warrior clan, they don't raise their own offspring. If a maiden like Rand's mom became pregnant, once she had the baby, she would be expected to anonymously adopt the child out to a non-warrior Aiel woman to raise. They're not supposed to know where the child is or who it's being raised by, so that they don't have any ties holding them back from being a maiden. So it's kind of a big deal to the maiden society when they have, this literal prodigal son of Rand returned to them. He's like the first son of a maiden who the maidens have ever known. So I hope that we will get to see that in a future episode, because the maidens go on to become his honor guard as a result. It also makes me think, though, that it's probably a good thing that Rand isn't connected to his Aiel heritage, because therefore is not an integral core part of his identity like it is for people who are raised Aiel, like Muradin and Couladin, for example. That's why, whatever happens in Rhuidean stays in Rhuidean, and unless you're a clan chief or a wise one, you're not allowed to know the true history of the Aiel, because it's so integral to them that they're a warrior culture that it's devastating and ego-shattering and mind-melting to learn the truth of their origins. And as we saw with Muradin, not everyone is able to cope with that reality. So it's probably a good thing Rand isn't connected to his Aiel heritage, because it's not as much of like an ego death or identity shattering for him to learn all of this information. And I think Moraine's big takeaway from seeing like all of these turnings of the wheel where she fails Rand in one way or another is going to be that she can't try to control Rand whatever she does. I was really worried and skeptical when I heard that they were taking Mat out of the Rhuidean plotline, but even in my Shadow Rising breakdown, I acknowledged that him and Egwene were really just background characters, and Mat especially was more along for the ride as comic relief than anything else. So in order for them to really give this storyline the time and attention that it deserves, and to also give Mat's storyline the time and attention it deserves, I'm glad that they separated the two and have reassured us with what they teased us with, that we are still going to see Mat's things play out. I'm still unsure how I feel about them changing the Choden Call to be Kalandor and the Sakarnen as an orb, but I do like that, like when Moraine finds the orb in the tree and holds it, it resembles the Choden Call, which is a statue of a woman holding an orb. So they still kind of alluded to it in a way, so that placated me a little bit because I thought it was cool. It also makes me wonder which came first, the seals on the Dark One's prison weakening or the birth of the Dragon Reborn? Were the seals already weakening and so the pattern turned out Rand because it was knew that was happening and that it was time for Armageddon? Or was Rand's birth what caused this chain reaction to begin? Because it seems like part of the pattern's design that it was Moraine's family who set events in motion to fulfill the prophecies of Rand's birth. So that just kind of made me think. Let me know what you think about that. I did also want to go back to a chapter in the Dragon Reborn where Perrin is in Teleron Riyadh, and he notes that there is a thick gray fog surrounding him, but it's dense and heavy, that the mist did not feel right. There was no dampness to it. That is a lot like the description of the fog in Rhuidean and what Moraine says about it, where it's like a very weirdly dry fog. So that makes me wonder if the fog is like tied into Teleron Riyadh or an like external part of the world of dreams, hiding Rhuidean in some way and like helping conceal spoil it. I also wanted to go back to chapter 46 of The Dragon Reborn, where Matt is sent on a mission to Camelin to deliver a letter to Morghese from Elaine, and he just so happens to overhear Lord Gabriel, who I'm calling Lord Gabrin, Lord Rabril, talking about wanting Elaine either under his control or quietly killed. So it makes me think that it maybe is his idea to bring Elaine out of the tower and back to Camelin, and not Morghese's, like I was talking about in that last episode review, where I wasn't sure if it was like just Morghese's protective instincts or if it was Gabriel telling her to pull Elaine out of the tower. That makes me think that it was Gabriel's idea to get Elaine back in Camelin, where she would be directly under his influence and control, but also deepen the rift between Andor and the White Tower. Or if he can't have her directly under his control, he wants her quietly assassinated because he's worried that Samael or one of the other Forsaken will get their hands on her first. If she's killed, that will also cause a rift between the White Tower and Andor. To go back a little bit to the brief glimpse that we got of Moraine in the rings and the everyone's evil alternate timeline, that was kind of like, I'm glad it was just a brief flicker moment and we didn't see it on screen for very long. I wanted to pay particular attention to that scene because on first glance I saw like something glinting on Egwene's mouth and it almost looked like the Damani bit. So I was like, oh, please tell me that Egwene being turned to the shadow didn't also involve her still remaining leashed and like a Damani under someone else's control. And when I went and looked closely at it, it was just like a piece of like lip jewelry. But I wonder if it was still kind of supposed to echo the Damani bit to show that she is being controlled by the dark side. I've been really hyping up and touting the costumes and the costume design this season, but the everyone's evil, or I think what they called on Instagram like the dark metal group Landfear and the Dark Ones, not coming to a city near you, didn't really like the looks for that one. They were just a little too modern for me. I get why the Forsaken wear more modern clothing to tie back and as a nod back to their Age of Legends origins, but yeah, the costume designs for the Emmons Fielders was a little bit of a miss for me on that one. Yeah, other than that, 11 out of 10 on this episode, no notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes.